I call the Honourable Member Jan Logie. Tēnā koe, Ms Logie.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. The Green Party will be supporting this bill to Select Committee, and we look forward to hearing from the experts and those with experience of these systems to guide us in our future vote. And I would like to acknowledge the Minister and the commitment she has put in terms of focusing on children and the work that she has done, and acknowledge that this bill comes out of a good place. And we can see that. And also to acknowledge you for the time that you've taken to brief us on this bill. With that said, probably quite a bit of the content of my speech will now be raising concerns and issues that we'll be wanting to look at in the Select Committee inquiry, and I guess that's about good democratic process, about working together on these things in the future, I hope. We certainly also have children at the heart of our concern, and recognise that 152,000 notifications every year are a sign of a real deep problem in this country, and that a third of those which are dealt with by SIFs, and that 22,000 are substantiated through that process. And that, you know, I'm sure for all of us, when we think about that, we can have media stories that come to our mind, or stories of people that we know, and the pictures and the faces of those children. And we know we're today, in this process, we're talking about their lives and their ability to be safe and grow into the people who they would want to be. So it is incredibly important. I do want to, which I'm compelled to point out that of the abuse in New Zealand, 70%, and this has been pointed out by Child Matters and also in a different context by the police, 70% of the abuse of children happens within the context of domestic violence. And we will be looking and asking questions throughout the process to see whether those connections will work, whether they are transparent, and whether that acknowledgement of domestic violence and the tragic role that it plays in the abuse of children, whether this system will respond to that reality. Because for us at the moment, it's not clear whether it will or not. And in fact, all too often we're hearing through people's experiences of SIFs that in fact at the moment is often working in the counter. So we will be definitely looking towards that. Improving the vulnerability of our children means that measures that are aimed at protection from abuse and neglect, improving children's physical, mental and cultural and emotional well-being, improving their education, strengthening their connections to families, whānau, iwi or other culturally recognised groups, and increasing their participation in decision-making in society and improving their social and economic well-being. It's a big job if we're going to fix this. And I think it's really important, and I noticed that the Minister's acknowledged that this bill is a small part of that work, and that the Children's Action Plan actually is even a bigger part of the government's agenda for this work. For us, we need to be able to see those connections to be able to see how it's going to work. Because if we can see the systems are being put in place, and those systems need improving, we have to see that they're going to be improving. Otherwise, we're sending people into and fixing in systems that currently are, we could say, re-abusing. And we also have a concern that the model suggested by this bill as it is at the moment doesn't look at the wider environmental impacts on children. And by focusing on the individual and the state's response to abuse, potentially actually might undermine the well-being of children. We clearly need policies, all of our government policies, to put children at the heart of them. And previously there have been several bills this year that have come before the House where there's been a refusal to put those clauses in. So that does create a sense of discomfort for us around that ability for the government to actually really enact that across the board, which is necessary for ensuring children's safety. We also need to resource families and make it as easy as possible for them to get help when they're struggling. And at the moment, the levels of inequality in New Zealand, part of the result of that inequality is distancing people with the least from the mainstream. And that has an impact in terms of people being able to get help and strengthen their family when they're struggling. And we also need to ensure that those helping systems we have are as robust as possible. Just this last week, the ex-Police Commissioner Howard Broad released his review of child, youth and family, the complaint system, and raised a number of concerns. And for us, that's really critical in terms of looking at this whole process. If we're going to be increasing referrals to child, youth and family, and we're going to be setting up a cross-departmental group with that at the heart of it, we need to know that that system is working. And sadly, at the moment, there are a lot of concerns. In his report, he noted that so each child in state care is currently supposed to be visited by a responsible social worker on an 8-week rotation. But doubts around that compliance were raised because of high levels of caseloads of social workers. And even though this is a really significant part of the defensive screen for child protection provided by the state at the moment, even that isn't happening at the moment. So we're concerned about putting a whole lot more work into the system when the absolute fundamentals, the children in state care, haven't got those protections working for them at the moment. We're also a bit worried about that at the moment. There's a lot of the information that's coming into SIFs in terms of the complaints and concerns are staying on the database as evidence, and that's locking in what turns out to be incorrect information, and that needs to be sorted as well if we're particularly going to be making decisions that aren't based on court rulings around people's suitability to be parents. We need to make sure that the information in the system is accurate. And that was raised by Commissioner Howard Broad as well, and the concern around those court decisions as well, that the evidence they're relying on social workers' judgments at the moment, and their facts that they're bringing to the court currently, I think they suggested that the process suffers from predetermined or bias because of that reliance on that information and perhaps a lack of consistency from the social workers across the board. So that if we're going to be putting in these systems in place, we need to make sure that the evidentiary processes are solid and that the ability for the system to cope is sound, because our children's lives depend on it. And at the moment, we're not convinced that, or we're worried, and we're going to be looking forward to make sure that that is in there. I really just want to bring some people's stories into this, and to recognise that we have particular concern around the child harm protection order. And I noted the Minister of Justice before speaking very passionately around the importance of this, and particularly in relation to where there hasn't been a conviction. And I can't help but respond now on the basis of that Minister's refusal to pick up the recommendations of the alternative pre-trial and trial hearings, systems that mean our justice system only convicts 1 in 100 of sexual offenders, and that there was a huge agreement right across sectors on significant aspects of that Law Commission work that could have improved that conviction rate. And if we're talking about keeping children safe, then we need to have a justice system that will deliver justice to those children before we remove anybody's rights. And this seems to be just saying, well, the system doesn't deliver justice, so we'll work around that rather than fixing the problem.
Thank you. I call the honourable member